Good morning. If you would, grab a Bible. Let's turn to Leviticus chapter 23. Leviticus 23, where we'll begin in this period of our worship. Leviticus chapter 23. As you're turning there and getting settled in, I want to welcome you, especially those who are visiting with us or who are new to us. We are glad that you're here, that you have chosen to take this time on a Sunday morning to come and be with the people of God. And I want to encourage you, if there's something that we can do to help you or questions that you have, to feel free to stick around and talk to us about those things. We'd love to answer your questions, to get to know you, and in some way include you in the work that we're doing. We'd love to do that, so please give us that opportunity. But thank you for being here with us this morning. I want to say, before I get started, something I forgot to mention a couple of weeks ago, which is we are doing our campus studies on the A&M campus near the MSC outside the bookstore is where we meet every Monday at 2 o'clock. And this semester we are covering growth areas, just different areas of growth. And I want to encourage all the college students, if you have availability, to be there tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Monday at 2 o'clock each week, we'll be planning on that. So come if you can. I want to begin our time this morning by reading from several places in Leviticus 23. I want you to notice a theme. This is a chapter that talks about how God set Israel's calendar and the different feasts that he expected them to observe throughout the year. It says in Leviticus 23 and verse 3, 6 days shall work be done, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no work. It is a Sabbath to the Lord in all your dwelling places. Of course, the Sabbath happens every week, and he says, you shall do no work. One day a week in Israel's life, there is a mandatory day off. Leave behind your regular work. No cultivating your fields, no working for your boss, no doing work on your home. You will do no work. Then, verse 4, these are the appointed feasts of the Lord, the holy convocations which you shall proclaim at the time appointed for them. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at twilight, is the Lord's Passover. Verse 7, on the first day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall not do any ordinary work, but you shall present a food offering to the Lord for 7 days. On the seventh day is a holy convocation. You shall not do any ordinary work. So the Passover has an entire week of observance, and he says on the first day and on the last day, you shall not do any ordinary work. Verse 20, Leviticus 23 and verse 20. And the priest shall wave them with the bread of the first fruits as a wave offering before the Lord with the 2 lambs. They shall be holy to the Lord for the priest. And you shall make a proclamation on the same day. You shall hold a holy convocation. You shall not do any ordinary work. It is a statute forever in all your dwelling places throughout your generations. This is the Feast of Weeks, which we also know as Pentecost. And he says, you shall not do any ordinary work, a holy day, a holy convocation. Verse 24, speak to the people of Israel, saying, in the 7th month, on the first day of the month, you shall observe a day of solemn rest, a memorial proclaimed with blasts of trumpets, a holy convocation. You shall not do any ordinary work, and you shall present a food offering to the Lord. Verse 28, and you shall not do any work on that very day, for it is a day of atonement, to make atonement for you before the Lord your God. So here you have the Feast of Trumpets, and then you have the Day of Atonement. Both of them, he says, are a reserved day, a special day. You shall not do any ordinary work. Verse 35, Leviticus 23:35, on the first day shall be a holy convocation. You shall not do any ordinary work. For 7 days you shall present food offerings to the Lord. On the 8th day you shall hold a holy convocation and present a food offering to the Lord. It is a solemn assembly. You shall not do any ordinary work. I hope you notice the thread that over and over again, as God sets the calendar for Israel, he says, we're going to have some mandatory days off. You will not work. They are holidays, which is the word we use. That's sort of the old word, holy days, days that are special, set aside, not normal days, rest days, sometimes to attend to special things that are God's things, and sometimes just to not work. It is powerful to me that God, in the law of Moses, orders his people to stop working. And I want to talk to you this morning about the fact that you are not a work machine. You are not a being whose sole purpose is your work. There are times when we need to not work, to rest. And I want to talk to us about that this morning. Now, let me say a couple of things before we jump into this. First, we're going to talk some about the Sabbath this morning. And I am not arguing as we talk about the Sabbath that you and I are intended to observe the Sabbath as a part of God's law, the way they did under the law of Moses. I will say that for this reason. In Colossians 2 and verse 16, Paul writes, "Therefore let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink, or with regard to a festival or a new moon or a Sabbath," which sounds a lot like Leviticus 23, right? What we just read. It's a catalog of the new moons, the Sabbaths, and the festivals. He says these are a shadow of the things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. So these things are the shadow, the substance is here, so don't let anyone judge you about those, condemn you, tell you you have to observe those things. Those are not part of following Jesus. So I'm not trying to argue this morning that we're under the law of Moses or that we're under the Sabbath law. Don't let anybody judge you or pressure you about that. However, when we say all of that, I still want to stress you're not a work machine. And that's what I want to talk about this morning. I also want to say, before we get started, that there are people, and perhaps there are people in our assembly this morning, who do not need to be told to rest, but who instead need to be told to work. Maybe that's students who need to be told to do more work. Maybe that is people who need to go find work. I understand that may be, and I want to remind you of a couple of things that the New Testament says about that. Such persons we command and encourage in the Lord Jesus Christ to do their work quietly and to earn their own living. Paul had to say that too. He had to say, guys, you need to go get a job. This is Ephesians 4:28. Let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. By the way, do you notice that? It's not just have enough to take care of yourself, but have enough to give to someone else. So there are people who may need to be told, quit resting and go work. I understand that. But that is not the discussion that I want to have today. I am thinking instead about this idea that rest was so important that God not only demonstrated it himself, but then he said, you need to follow my example by resting. I am concerned about the current of our culture in which we see ourselves as machines for money making. That every hour we have has to be calculated for maximum output. That we have to think of ourselves as commodities. Our skills are assets. We have to maximize our earning potential. I'm thinking about this sense that we just have to keep on pushing relentlessly until we burn ourselves out and become overwhelmed with stress. I am thinking about how we then take our frustrations out on our family, or we come home from work and we just try to escape into any and everything that we can find, or we mentally check out in other parts of our life, or we turn to vices to try to find some kind of release. I'm thinking about how we are not work machines. I'm thinking about that voice that is within us that tells us we're nothing until we accomplish something amazing. That we climb that ladder, we check those boxes, we make that money. That voice that is seeking something that work can never give us. And I'm thinking about the passion and devotion that we can pour into our jobs that really needs to be poured into things that matter, like our homes and our faith. You are not a work machine. Meanwhile, the danger exists that we will sacrifice our faith and our families in pursuit of something that will never really satisfy us and often makes us feel less than human. So let's talk about why you and I need rest. I just want to give you 4 quick points here about why we need rest. First, rest refreshes us. I had Ian read for us this morning about how God creates the world, and as he creates the world, it says he rests on the 7th day. And on the 7th day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the 7th day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. He rested from his work. Why would God do that? Think about it. Does God need rest? Does God get tired? This is not about God. This is about the creation that he had made and what he is trying to teach the creation. He wants us to know that there is a time in which work needs to stop and we rest. It is part of the rhythm that God puts into his creation. If you think about it and you read Genesis, Genesis has those rhythms. There is day and night, evening and morning. There is hot and cold, summer and winter. Yes, someday it will be cold again. There is night and day. There is work and rest. In fact, it's funny, it's even part of the earth itself. Turn a page over here, Leviticus 25. Leviticus 25 and verse 3. It says, Leviticus 25:3, for 6 years you shall sow your field, and for 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather its fruits. But in the 7th year there shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land. A Sabbath to the Lord. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. You shall not reap what grows of itself in your harvest, or gather the grapes of your undressed vine. It shall be a year of solemn rest for the land. Even the land needs rest. That the land is not a work machine. You just work it and work it and work it. And we've discovered the value of letting land lie fallow, because even the land can't work that hard. It's not a machine. So God has put this into creation, that everything that he has made needs to fit into the rhythm of work and rest, and not thinking that the solution to every problem is work harder and do more. That's not the answer. You're not a work machine. But I want to talk about this idea of refreshment. Let's talk about refreshment for a minute. Go with me to Exodus chapter 23. Nearly said Ezekiel, but I don't want to go to Ezekiel right now. Scott's already doing that. So, Exodus 23. Exodus 23, we're going to read in verse 12. Exodus 23 and verse 12 says, 6 days you shall do your work, but on the 7th day you shall rest, that your ox and your donkey may have rest, and the son of your servant woman and the alien may be refreshed. The majority of our time, he says, should be spent working. 6 days you're going to work, he says in verse 12. 6 days you shall do your work. There's a lot to do. You shouldn't be an idle people. But it seems as though God knew they were going to do their work. What he needed to warn them against was don't overwork. Stop. 6 days you work, but on the 7th day you shall rest. And notice what he says. Your ox and your donkey need rest. Your workers need rest, because everyone will be refreshed. It's not just about you, he says. It's also about your animals. Are you thinking about them? It's also about your servants. Are you thinking about them? Because everybody, everything needs a time when it's not constantly working. Turn over to Exodus 31. Exodus 31. Verse 16. Exodus 31 and verse 16. It says, therefore the people of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, observing the Sabbath throughout their generations as a covenant forever. Exodus 31:17. It is a sign forever between me and the people of Israel, that in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the 7th day he rested and was refreshed. Even God says he rested and was refreshed. This is what rest does for us. It refreshes us. It changes us so that now we are ready. We are energized. We are calm. We are prepared to go back into work. And even God, it says, was refreshed by his rest. I don't know all the implications of that, but I know if even God was refreshed, that you and I are going to be refreshed when we rest. Now, there is a blessing in that. And I believe that is the reason Jesus says what he says about the Sabbath, when he says the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. You remember Jesus tangled with the Jews all the time about the Sabbath, because they had made the Sabbath into a burden. You can't do anything good. Oh, you're plucking that head of grain. Oh, you're working on the Sabbath. Oh, you healed that person. Oh, we don't heal anybody on the Sabbath. No. And so it became a thing where no one could even do good things on the Sabbath, or even neutral things. God didn't make the rule of the Sabbath to be a burden. He made it to be a blessing, so that we had to stop for a minute and be refreshed. The Sabbath was made to bless us, not to be a burden to us, because you are not a work machine. You need rest. 2019, 55% of American workers reported that they did not take all the paid time off their jobs offered. 55%. That means the odds are pretty good. Some of us are in this room. 55%. 2018, the average American earned 23.9 days of paid time off and only took 17.4, which means that the average American donated a week of time to their employer, probably without any recognition. Why? According to the World Health Organization, overwork contributes to about 745,000 deaths through strokes and heart disease. I don't always know how they calculate that, but you get the point. It's not good for you to overwork. But I think we don't need a bunch of stats to know that, right? Maybe we need stats to remind us that it's a problem. But we all know that we need mental space and physical rest and reminders that we enjoy stuff that's not work, that there's more to us than just what we do every day for a job. You are not a work machine. God made you to rest. The answer to every problem is not work more and do harder. The answer may be take a break. And I especially believe that it is important because in that time of rest, we remind ourselves of who we truly are. We remind ourselves that we have relationships and hopes and dreams, the space to remember what is important in our lives. That refreshes us. It also leads us to this, that we need rest because rest gives us space to focus on God. Remember, we began with the calendar and the festivals, how they needed time, and those times that were God's times, they were days of solemn rest. They were holy days. They were holy convocations. It's just hard to pay adequate attention to God and His things when we're also busy working. Now, please don't misunderstand me when I say that. I do not mean that when we have a job and we go to work, we can't ever think about God. I don't mean that. In fact, this is Paul in Colossians 3, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. Paul says, you do your work, everyday work, and you do it as if you're working for the Lord. So keep Him in mind and do that as a service to God. However, what I am saying is that working all the time may mean that we struggle to find that space to focus on the things that matter most about us. It is challenging to focus on God's things when we have work at hand that might distract us. Let's go to Isaiah 58 for a moment. Isaiah 58. In Isaiah 58, the problem is that God is unhappy with the worship of His people. And so He corrects a few things about that and kind of has a dialogue with them. Isaiah 58 and verse 3. Isaiah 58 and verse 3, it says, the people are asking, why have we fasted and you see it not? Why have we humbled ourselves and you take no knowledge of it? Behold, this is God's answer, in the day of your fast, you seek your own pleasure and oppress all your workers. Behold, you fast only to quarrel and to fight and to hit with a wicked fist. I want you to notice that phrase in verse 3, you fast, you seek your own pleasure, or you do your own business. You know, you fast, yes, but you're not really focused on me. Instead, you're focused on what you want and what you're interested in. Look down a little further here in verse 13, Isaiah 58 and verse 13. He says, if you turn back your foot from the Sabbath and from doing your pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight and the holy day of the Lord honorable, if you honor it, not going your own ways or seeking your own pleasure or talking idly, then you shall take delight in the Lord, and I will make you ride on the heights of the earth. I will feed you with the heritage of Jacob your father, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. So he says, truly resting here means not going your own ways. He says that in verse 13, not seeking your own pleasure. It's about honoring God and focusing on God, not just on your own stuff. And it's important for us to remember that sometimes what needs to happen is that we stop. We stop everything that we have been deciding to do that is about us. And we say, wait a minute, God needs my attention. I must attend to God. I need to worship Him. I need to pray to Him. I need to think about Him. I need to read His Word. And sometimes that means I need to quit just for a moment, just for a while, all my work. You need to think about the fact that our culture sees our entire lives focusing on our work. Our work becomes our identity. It's the question we ask each other, what do you do? And then the time comes, the thing that we all look forward to, what we're really pushing toward, is someday we'll retire from our work, and that will be the thing we can't wait to do. How did we, as disciples of Jesus, allow the world to define us by something as trivial as what we do? When God defines us by who we are and in whose image we are made. It may be rest that gives us the space to challenge that narrative. When can we remember that we are God's children? We need rest so that we have the space to attend to God's things in a way that matters. But as this passage suggests, I want to also throw this at you. It may be that we need to focus that non-work time not just on our own stuff. I find this really challenging. When I am not working, I want to be doing what I want to do. Don't you? But where is the time? Where is the space to be about God's things? If I'm working all the time and then I'm resting and just thinking about me, where is God's time? This is the challenge. And so it is important to rest, but also to devote those times to God's things. You are not a work machine. You are a child of God and a creation of God. And rest may help you realize that and focus on that. Third, rest requires us to trust God. One of the fundamental tensions in the Old Testament about rest is if I quit working, how will I be taken care of? Will I have enough money? Remember that in the ancient world, very often, regular people lived hand to mouth. If you didn't work that day, you probably didn't eat that day. So you wake up each morning, and you can see why Jesus talks about don't be anxious about what you'll eat. That meant a lot different to them than it does to us, where we're wondering about the menu, and they were wondering, will there be anything? It takes different perspective when he says, give us this day our daily bread, and we have far more than just daily bread. But the perspective is, if I quit working, even for a day, how will I make ends meet? I want you to go with me to Nehemiah chapter 13. Nehemiah 13. Had to get quiet so I could sing the books of the Bible song in my head. Find Nehemiah 13. So isn't it powerful then, if ancient peoples are thinking this way and living this way, that God insists on the Sabbath, insists on rest, even though it might mean you're forfeiting an important part of your income? Nehemiah 13 and verse 15. Nehemiah says, in those days I saw in Judah people treading wine presses on the Sabbath and bringing in heaps of grain and loading them on donkeys, and also wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of loads, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I warned them on the day in which they sold food. Tyrians also who lived in the city brought in fish and all kinds of good and sold them on the Sabbath to the people of Judah in Jerusalem itself. And I confronted the nobles of Judah and said to them, what is this evil thing that you're doing, profaning the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers act in this way? Did not our God bring all this disaster on us and on our city? Now you are bringing more wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath. So here you've got people, and they are rebelling against the Sabbath command. And I think it's easy to look at that and say, oh, look, they have no respect for God and his word. But please understand why they would do that. Why would people violate the Sabbath? It is not because they don't care about God. It's because they want to make money. They need money to live. And so they say, here is another day. If I quit working on the Sabbath, I take out 1/7 of my income. Can I live on that? Think about it. Would you be willing to forfeit 1/7 of your income? That would take some faith, wouldn't it? So you know what? I'm going to forego what I could be making and just rest. It requires us to trust God. Fascinating story. You remember the story when Israel is in the desert and God begins to send manna to Israel. And of course, the first day they try to gather extra manna and it all spoils. And so God says, why won't you trust me? Every day you're going to have your daily bread. And so they go out and they collect until Friday. And on Friday, they can collect for 2 days so that they don't go gather more food on the Sabbath, so that they can rest. And that food doesn't spoil. The idea there is that God is saying, when I give you the command and I give you the expectation, I'm going to take care of making it work. I'm not going to give you this and tell you to rest and you starve. I will provide. But it requires a trust in God's provision. And so Jesus teaches us to pray, give us this day our daily bread, trusting God to provide. So let me say a couple of things about this in our time. I believe this may apply to the kinds of jobs that we seek and have. Money is not the most important consideration in a job. Money is not the most important consideration in a job. We are not work machines, just here to maximize what we can make. Where will we live? What time will we have to do the things that are important to us? How can I have the energy to do the things that matter, the focus that I will have outside my job if I choose this? How many hours will I be working to make that money? Is it worth what I am sacrificing? And I am challenging us to say that if we trust God by following His will, seeking first the kingdom of God and what His righteousness is, then we will have what we need, but it will require trust. Trust to say, I'm not just going to make it all myself. I'm not going to do it all myself. I'm going to do what I believe is right. I admire so much. I know people in this group, in this congregation, who have said, I'm going to take a different job so that I can be with my family more. Less money to be at home. That's a challenge. And I'm not saying someone's wrong to make a different decision. I am saying don't forget that there will always be trust here, that we make these decisions, trusting that God will provide if I am following His pattern and His thought. It also may mean that we need to cut back on the 60 or 80-hour weeks because we want to live differently. And we will trust God to provide what we need. But that rest, that insistence on I'm not a work machine, will be different from our world, and it will require trust. All right, one more thing. We need rest because rest points us toward our ultimate rest. I want you to think about this with me for just a minute. We read this passage earlier. Let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink, or with regard to a festival or a new moon or a Sabbath. These are a shadow of the things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. They're a shadow. That is, they're not the real thing, but they do point toward the real thing. Sabbath does too. Rest. It points toward the real thing. So Jesus says, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Rest. That's what we've been talking about, right? Rest. True rest. And when you and I rest from our work, it is a foretaste of the rest we will someday inherit in the presence of Jesus. I want you to go with me to Hebrews 4. One last passage we'll look at this morning. Hebrews chapter 4. The Hebrew writer is going to play with this idea of rest as well. He talks about how Israel failed to enter the rest God had promised in the promised land. And then he says, you be careful that you don't fall short of inheriting the rest of God in the same way. They didn't enter because of their unbelief. It says in Hebrews 4 and verse 8, for if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken of another day later on. So then, there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works as God did from his. Let us therefore strive to enter that rest so that no one may fall by the same sort of disobedience. There remains a Sabbath rest, he says, for the people of God, a hope that someday we will rest from our works the way God rests from his works on the seventh day, that we will rest. Rest reminds us that there will be a time when we won't work anymore. Rest reminds us that just like our physical work, there comes a time when all our work will end. And the things that we do for God and the work we do in our families and the relationships we build and the skills we develop, there comes a time when we will lay it all down. And another will come and fill our shoes, and we will go to be with God. And every time you and I stop working long enough to lift our heads up and look around, it reminds us, where are we and where are we going? What's the point of all of this? Where am I headed? What is my true work? What am I accomplishing? Am I headed toward the rest God has promised? Or am I just a work machine? There will be a time when you rest from your work. And what will matter then will not be what you accomplished in your career. What will matter then will be whether you enter by faith into God's rest. That's the point. And I believe when you and I take some time to step back from all the work we do, we gain some perspective, and it points us toward where we're headed. The night is coming when no man can work. So am I ready for that? You are not a work machine. Your life is more than work. So I encourage you to take time to rest, to pace yourself, to trust God, to pay attention to God, and to look forward to greater things that He has in store for you. There is more to life than work. God made us not just to produce things. God also made us in His image to pursue Him and seek His things. That is your purpose in life. And so I want to encourage you, if you're here this morning and ready to live for a different purpose, if you are ready to say, you know what, I want to seek the deeper and better things. I don't want to get caught up in things of this world. I want to seek the rest that is to come. That this is a great opportunity for you to come and let that be known, to turn away from the way you've been living, the sins you've committed, and to turn toward Jesus, who died to take away our sins and to give us rest. And if you're ready to do that this morning, this is an opportunity we give where we sing a song, and anyone who has a need can come to the front, let that need be known, and we can try to